What tragedy was actually a blessing in disguise? I got into a car crash, and it was the best day of my life. Every billionaire asks themselves the same thing. Would she still love me if I had nothing? The second my airbag deployed, I knew exactly what to do. I texted my assistant Layla from the ambulance. Code Silver. She knew what that meant. By the time we reached my private hospital wing, she'd assembled the team. 50 paid actor employees were ready to help me pretend I was a vegetable. The head of neurology cost $2 million and sold the diagnosis perfectly. Every nurse signed NDAs worth their mortgages. The doctor announced complete paralysis below the chest, and Elena's tears broke my heart. She was an angel. She'd fluff my pillows, stroke my hair, and whisper loving words. But the second we were alone, her face would go cold. Vegetables shouldn't take this long to die, she'd mutter, then practice her concerned face in the mirror. She called her ex Dean while standing over me. The accident worked perfectly. Prenups void for disability. She'd take crying selfies for Instagram, checking follower counts between fake tears. My nurse was actually my head of security, documenting everything. She performed grief like an actress when my mother visited, then immediately called her lawyer. How much longer until I can pull the plug legally? My mother, who I'd briefed, played the concerned mother-in-law perfectly, while Elena counted days on her calendar, circling dates in red. 3 years of love letters in my desk drawer, and she was already practicing my eulogy. Week 3 brought Rick. My best friend since we were 12, my best man twice, walked into my room, and Elena locked the door. He's completely gone, she said, snapping fingers in my face, shining phone lights in my eyes. Watch this. She slapped me hard across the face. Then again. Rick laughed nervously until she grabbed his hand and put it on her breast. He can't feel anything. We could make love right here. Rick pulled back, but she pushed harder. Come on, it's nothing we haven't done before. Plus, you know I'm into voyeurism. My security team watched through hidden cameras as she pulled Rick onto my bed. Imagine inheriting his empire through our kid, she whispered, while unzipping his pants 2 feet from my paralyzed body. Rick's resistance crumbled when she mentioned the billions. They made love in my bed while I lay there, her wedding ring catching light with each movement. As soon as they left, my lawyers swarmed my room, and I was grateful it was finally over. Sir, Blake said in a low voice, without video proof of attempted murder or conspiracy, she'll walk away with half your fortune in divorce court. We need to keep going until she discusses your death on camera. The irony was palpable. I'd been the one to insist on not getting a prenup. Over the next 4 months, she gave us everything we needed and more. In month 3, she got me declared incompetent, using my own paid experts who played their parts. The judge's ruling was theatrical, everyone knowing their role. My forensic accountant tracked $40 million flowing offshore while she practiced eulogies. He was the love of my life, she'd rehearse, adding tears on cue. Rick visited daily now for their scheduled sessions in my bed. Our kid's inheriting everything, he'd say while she rode him, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. She'd describe my death in detail during intimacy. First the facility, then a little morphine accident. The pregnancy test came back positive on week 16. She waved it in my face. This is your friend's baby, but who's asking for DNA? She'd research untraceable poisons on my laptop while sitting on my legs. Paralyzed vegetables don't need passwords, she'd say, transferring another $1 million. The worst was when she'd bring men home, not just Rick anymore. Dean, her trainer, strangers from bars. She'd F them in our bed while describing my helplessness. He watches everything but can't do shit, she'd tell them, and they'd laugh while using my paralyzed body as a footrest. Month 4 accelerated everything. She booked a date to renew our wedding vows at my Napa estate and invited 500 guests to watch her marry a vegetable. Till death do us part won't take long, she told Rick, while trying on the $100,000 dress in our bedroom. She'd eat elaborate dinners on my chest, deliberately spilling wine on my face. Vegetables don't need dignity, she'd say, taking photos for her private collection. The night before our wedding, she dressed me like a corpse. Even dead, you'll look good in photos, she said, straightening my tie with fingers that had signed my death warrant. She kissed my forehead with arctic lips. The second her car cleared the gates, I sat up. Elena pretended to love a paralyzed man, so I was going to paralyze her entire future. My spine cracked like bubble wrap as I pushed myself upright for the first time in 4 months. Every muscle in my body screamed from the forced stillness, my legs shaking as blood rushed back into places that had been motionless for too long. The bedroom door opened, and Layla walked in carrying 3 laptops, followed by Blake and my head of security, who'd been posing as my nurse. They spread documents across the bed while I stretched my arms, feeling pins and needles shoot through every nerve. Blake pulled up the estate blueprints on his screen and pointed to red dots marking camera positions throughout the Napa property. We spent the next 6 hours going through every angle, every blind spot, making sure the backup cameras covered areas Elena might check. The security chief showed me footage from 12 different feeds, all recording to servers in 3 separate locations. Blake kept rubbing his forehead as we worked, finally pushing his laptop away to look me straight in the eye. He reminded me that without actual attempted murder on tape, I'd committed fraud, conspiracy, and about 15 other crimes that could land me in federal prison. The stakes weren't just money anymore, he said. My freedom was on the line if this went sideways. I nodded and kept reviewing footage while my muscles cramped from sitting upright after so long. My phone buzzed at 2 in the morning with the neurologist's name flashing on screen. His voice shook as he told me the medical board had started asking questions about my diagnosis. The head of security grabbed the phone and spent 20 minutes reminding him about his NDA, about the $2 million he'd already spent, about what would happen if he backed out now. The doctor finally calmed down enough to confirm he'd stick to the plan through tomorrow. An hour later, my mother's car pulled into the driveway, and she came straight to my room, still in her nightgown. Her hands trembled as she sat on my bed, grabbing my face to look at me. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow, and begged me to call it off. She told me I'd become someone she didn't recognize, that watching me lie there for months while Elena did those things had broken something in her. I held her hands but shook my head, explaining we were too deep to stop now. The security team worked through the night compiling video clips on their laptops. They'd edited together Elena's worst statements about killing me, about the morphine, about making it look natural. Each clip made my stomach turn, but Blake said we needed them ready for law enforcement. The forensic accountant sent encrypted files showing the asset freeze paperwork was ready to execute. The second we had grounds for arrest, 40 million in offshore accounts would be locked within hours. I grabbed a plastic bag from my nightstand and carefully removed a few strands of hair from Rick's jacket that hung in my closet. Then I took Elena's hairbrush from the bathroom, pulling several strands with intact roots. The security chief sealed both samples in evidence bags and arranged for a lab pickup within the hour. They promised results in 24 hours, though we all knew what they'd show. My phone rang again at 4:30 with my COO's name on the display. He sounded exhausted as he explained the board was meeting next week to discuss my leadership given my medical condition. If I didn't wrap this up at tomorrow's ceremony, I'd lose my company regardless of what happened with Elena. The crisis PR consultant arrived at 5 in the morning, a woman in her 50s who looked like she hadn't slept either. She spread out different statement drafts across my desk, each one addressing different scenarios. She warned me that once this story broke, public opinion would be brutal, no matter how we spun it. Some people would see me as clever for exposing Elena. Others would call me manipulative for the whole scheme. She said there was no version where I came out looking completely good. Blake reviewed more footage while the consultant worked on statements. The security team tested their communication devices for tomorrow, making sure everyone could hear each other. My mother sat in the corner, watching everything unfold with tears running down her face. The neurologist texted that he'd taken sleeping pills to calm down and would be ready for his role. Layla confirmed all the actors knew their positions for the ceremony. The forensic accountant sent hourly updates on Elena's account activity. She'd moved another 100,000 overnight, probably to pay Dean for his help tomorrow. Every transfer was perfectly documented, creating a paper trail that would bury her in court. The sun started coming up as we finalized details, my body aching from being upright after months of stillness. Tomorrow would either destroy Elena or land me in prison, and there was no turning back now. Blake pulled me aside at 6 in the morning and explained the harsh reality that all our recordings of threats weren't enough for criminal charges. He said prosecutors needed her actually trying to kill me, not just talking about it, and without that, we'd lose everything in divorce court. The security team leader showed us feeds from every angle at the Napa estate on his laptop, cameras hidden in light fixtures and air vents covering every single room. He pointed out backup cameras behind mirrors and inside fake smoke detectors in case Elena found the obvious ones. The doorbell rang at 7, and a court evaluator walked in with official papers, saying Elena had filed for immediate conservatorship and he needed to assess my condition right now. I had to drop back into my paralyzed act instantly while he pulled out a clipboard and started taking notes about my responses to stimuli. Elena came into the room and grabbed my shoulders hard, yanking me up to reposition me on the bed, and she let my head slam back against the headboard with a crack. The evaluator wrote something down while I stayed completely limp, fighting every instinct to protect myself from the impact. She wiped drool from my face with rough swipes and told the evaluator I was getting worse every day, that I couldn't even hold my head up anymore. He watched her dig her nails into my arm while checking for reflexes, and I had to stay dead weight while she left marks on my skin. After he left, my security chief reviewed the footage and said Rick had been pacing outside the house for an hour before driving away without coming in. He suggested we could flip Rick as a witness, since the guy looked ready to crack from guilt, his hands shaking on the steering wheel in the driveway camera footage. The lab courier arrived with an envelope marked urgent, and inside were the DNA results confirming what we already knew about Rick being the father. Blake looked at the papers and said, "This gave us leverage, but only if Rick didn't know we had the proof yet, so we needed to keep it quiet." I watched through the bedroom camera feed as Dean showed up and sat with Elena in the living room while she thought I was unconscious upstairs. He pulled out his phone and showed her something about morphine doses, saying 10 milligrams would look natural for someone in my condition, but 15 would guarantee results. Elena nodded and asked how long it would take, and he said 20 minutes max if injected properly. All of it captured perfectly on our hidden microphones. My phone buzzed with a call from the neurologist who was panicking because the medical board had contacted him about irregularities in my diagnosis paperwork. He kept saying he couldn't lose his license over this, and I had to promise him we'd protect him if he just held it together for one more day. The security team played me audio of him pacing in his office and talking to himself about prison time for medical fraud, and I realized he might blow everything if we didn't calm him down. My mother arrived to help me get ready, and Elena walked in to adjust my tie, pulling it way too tight while making jokes about how corpses don't need to breathe. Mom's eyes filled with tears as Elena yanked the tie even tighter, and she had to leave the room before she said something that would ruin our plan. I could see her in the hallway camera crying and pressing her hand over her mouth to stay quiet while Elena kept pulling at my clothes. Elena left for the estate to check preparations, and Rick came in alone, sitting next to my bed and staring at my face for 5 minutes before speaking. He started crying and apologizing to my unconscious body about the affair, saying he knew I'd trusted him more than anyone and he'd thrown it away for money. He confessed that Elena had been texting him for months before my accident, sending photos and promising him half of everything if he helped her. He said he tried to resist at first, but she knew exactly how to manipulate him, bringing up his gambling debts and his failed business that I'd refused to bail out again. The security team recorded every word as he admitted he'd been sleeping with her even before our wedding, that she'd laughed about fooling me into marriage. He talked about how she'd practiced her wedding vows in his bed, making fun of the personal promises I'd written for her while they were naked together. He said she'd shown him the prenup I'd refused to sign, and they'd celebrated with champagne, knowing she'd get everything if something happened to me. He grabbed my hand and squeezed it, saying he wished he could take it all back, but Elena owned him now with the pregnancy and the evidence of their affair. He left sobbing, and I wanted to sit up and punch him, but Blake reminded me through my earpiece that we needed him as a witness, not an enemy. The forensic accountant sent another update showing Elena had moved $200,000 more overnight to accounts in the Caymans that she thought we didn't know about. Blake filed emergency motions with the court to freeze those accounts the second we had grounds for arrest, the papers ready to execute within minutes. My mother came back in and helped me into the wheelchair, her hands shaking as she strapped me in for the drive to Napa, where 500 guests were already gathering to watch my wife renew vows with a vegetable. The drive took 3 hours, and Elena spent the whole time on her phone arranging last-minute details while I sat strapped in the special van they'd rented for transporting me. She'd brought a hospice consultant to the house yesterday, and I'd watched through half-closed eyes as the woman explained different comfort care options to Elena in our living room. Elena kept asking about morphine doses, and the consultant pulled out charts showing how much would ease pain versus how much would suppress breathing completely. The woman thought she was helping a caring wife understand end-of-life options, but Elena was taking notes like she was studying for a test. She asked about injection sites and how long different doses would take to work, and whether anyone would check blood levels afterward. The consultant mentioned that families often kept extra morphine on hand for emergencies, and Elena's eyes lit up as she wrote down the exact milligram amounts. My security team got every word on tape, including when Elena asked if morphine overdoses looked different from natural death in her husband's condition. The consultant said usually not if done carefully, and Elena nodded while circling numbers in her notebook. Blake called me after reviewing the footage to say we finally had clear evidence of murder planning, but we needed more to make it stick in court. My forensic accountant had been digging into Elena's finances all morning and discovered something huge right before we left for Napa. Elena's lawyer had been moving money through 3 shell companies all registered to Dean's business address. The paper trail showed $40 million flowing from my accounts through these companies and then offshore to the Caymans. Each transfer happened right after Elena got power of attorney over different parts of my estate. The accountant said it was the clearest financial conspiracy he'd seen in 20 years of fraud investigation. Blake immediately prepared documents to freeze those accounts, but we had to wait until we had grounds for arrest. The court evaluator had visited again yesterday and spent 2 hours observing Elena's care of me. She deliberately let my head drop hard against the wheelchair headrest multiple times and forgot to give me water for hours. The evaluator took notes on everything and later submitted his report recommending full conservatorship transfer to Elena. Blake panicked when he saw the recommendation because it would give Elena complete control over my medical decisions, including end-of-life care. He drove straight to the courthouse and filed emergency paperwork, arguing procedural issues with the evaluation. The judge was suspicious, but agreed to delay the transfer for 1 week, which would give us time to execute our plan at the ceremony. Blake also had the lab run the paternity test twice to make absolutely sure Rick was the father of Elena's baby. Both tests came back with the same result, showing 99.9% probability that Rick, not me, was the biological father. Blake prepared legal documents that would challenge any inheritance claims for the child, but he said using them would be cruel since the baby was innocent. Still, we needed every piece of leverage we could get against Elena and Rick. The PR consultant met with me and Blake this morning before we left and laid out different scenarios for how the public would react. She said if we revealed everything, some people would see me as a clever victim who exposed a murderer. Others would hate me for the deception and say I was just as bad as Elena for faking paralysis. She warned there was no way to control the narrative once it broke, and we'd have to accept whatever judgment came. The worst news came from my company's board of directors who scheduled an emergency meeting for next week. My COO had called to warn me they were planning to vote on removing me as CEO due to my medical condition. If I didn't resolve this situation at tomorrow's ceremony, I'd lose control of my company regardless of what happened with Elena. Blake managed to buy us time on another front by getting the conservatorship delayed, but the judge seemed to know something wasn't right. She kept asking Blake why he was filing on behalf of someone who was supposedly brain dead, and he had to dance around the truth without lying to the court. The delay was only for 1 week, which meant everything had to happen tomorrow, or Elena would get full control. The assistant district attorney's office had started their own investigation after getting an anonymous tip about the hospice consultant's visit. Blake warned me this could complicate our plans because if they moved too fast, they might arrest Elena before we got all the evidence we needed. The ADA wanted to help, but she needed more proof than just suspicious questions about morphine to make attempted murder charges stick. I started having serious doubts about the whole plan while sitting in that van watching Elena smile at her reflection in her phone screen. My mother must have seen something in my eyes because she squeezed my hand and whispered that we couldn't stop now. She reminded me that Elena knew exactly how much morphine it would take to kill me and where to inject it. If we called off the plan now, I'd be genuinely vulnerable because Elena already had everything she needed to murder me. She was right, but it didn't make me feel better about what we were about to do. My security chief called Blake during the drive to report that they'd just recorded Elena on the phone with Dean, discussing the exact morphine dose that would mimic natural death. Elena told him she planned to do it right after tomorrow's ceremony, when all the guests had gone home and the staff was cleaning up. Dean asked if she was sure it would work, and she said the hospice consultant had basically given her a manual for the perfect murder. She mentioned that with me gone and the baby on the way, she and Rick would have everything they'd ever wanted. Dean laughed and said he wanted his cut as promised, and Elena assured him the offshore accounts were ready. The security team had it all on tape, but Blake said we still needed her to actually attempt the injection for attempted murder charges to guarantee a conviction. We pulled up to the Napa estate, and I saw hundreds of cars already filling the massive parking area. Security wheeled me through the main entrance while Elena played the perfect wife for arriving guests. She kissed my forehead for the cameras and adjusted my tie with fake tenderness. Inside our suite, she started getting ready and noticed something black stuck under the nightstand. She pulled out one of the decoy microphones we'd planted, and her face went white. She grabbed her phone and started using the flashlight to check under every piece of furniture. She ran her hands along the bed frame and checked behind picture frames while muttering about paranoia. She found 2 more decoys in obvious spots and crushed them under her heel. She didn't find the real ones hidden in the light fixtures and smoke detectors. After that, she started whispering when she talked and turned on music to cover conversations. Blake called my phone, which Elena had been monitoring, and left a voicemail about updating my will. He mentioned leaving everything to the unborn child instead of Elena directly. She played it 3 times with a huge smile spreading across her face. She opened my laptop and found the draft document Blake had left open on purpose. The fake will gave her kid control of everything with Elena as guardian until they turned 18. She took photos of every page and texted them to someone. She practiced her surprised face in the mirror for when the will would be read after my death. Layla had someone slip a note under Rick's hotel room door with a photo of the paternity test results. The note said he had 6 hours to cooperate or face prosecution for conspiracy. Rick read it 5 times before burning it in the bathroom sink. He kept checking his phone and sweating through his shirt. The ADA called Blake during lunch and asked to meet privately at a coffee shop downtown. Blake drove there and found her in the back corner booth looking serious. She showed him photos of Elena at the pharmacy, asking about morphine doses. She said she knew something was wrong but needed more evidence to move officially. She asked Blake point blank if I was really paralyzed, and he had to dodge the question carefully. She gave him her direct number and said to call the second Elena made her move. Blake thanked her and left, knowing we had an ally but not full protection. The judge's clerk called about the conservatorship hearing and said it was pushed back a week. Blake asked why, and she said the judge had concerns about the timeline and wanted more documentation. This meant Elena wouldn't get full control until after the ceremony, which gave us our window. The medical board courier arrived at the estate and served papers to the neurologist who was there as a guest. He went pale reading them and immediately called Blake from the bathroom. He said the board was investigating his diagnosis and threatening his license. Blake told him to stay calm and play his part for one more day. The neurologist said he wanted protection in writing, or he'd tell everyone the truth right now. Blake had to promise him immunity and a legal defense fund to keep him quiet. Elena found Rick at the bar and pulled him into a storage closet to talk privately. She told him her plan for after the reception, when staff would be cleaning up. She said she'd wheel me to our room for a private goodbye while everyone was distracted. She described exactly how she'd inject me between my toes, where nobody would look for marks. Rick nodded and said he'd make sure nobody interrupted them. The PR consultant sat with me in the van, running through different scenarios on her tablet. She showed me public reaction models for every possible outcome. She said even if I proved Elena tried to kill me, half the public would hate me for faking paralysis. She said there was no clean way out, and I'd have to accept whatever judgment came. She prepared 3 different press releases depending on how things went down. She warned me that my reputation would never fully recover, no matter what happened. Security called Blake to report finding something in Elena's jewelry box during a routine sweep. They'd discovered a small metal key with numbers etched on it. The forensic accountant confirmed it matched one of the offshore accounts Elena had stolen money from. Blake said this was physical evidence that couldn't be explained away digitally. They photographed it and put it back, so Elena wouldn't know we'd found it. Rick met Elena in the garden, where she didn't know we had cameras hidden in the fake rocks. He was wearing the wire, but acted nervous and kept touching his chest where it was taped. Elena told him exactly how much morphine she'd use and where she got it from. She said the hospice consultant basically gave her a recipe for the perfect murder. She mentioned making it look like compassionate end-of-life care that nobody would question. Rick asked if she was sure, and she slapped him hard across the face. She said they were too close to back out now, and he needed to grow a spine. She reminded him about the baby and the billions they'd inherit together. The wire caught every word, including her laughing about how I'd never see it coming. Blake listened to the recording and confirmed we finally had enough for attempted murder charges. Security posted agents at every exit, and the ADA had plainclothes officers mixed in with the catering staff. Everyone was in position for tomorrow's confrontation, but I felt sick thinking about what would happen next. The next morning, the ADA called Blake and said she'd drawn up the arrest warrants, but needed more than just Rick's recording to make charges stick. She wanted to catch Elena actually attempting something, but promised her team would intervene before any real harm happened. Blake put her on speaker while I listened from my wheelchair, and she explained they'd need Elena holding the syringe or actually injecting me for attempted murder to hold up in court. My mother arrived at noon and sat beside my bed while Elena was at the spa getting ready for tomorrow's ceremony. We worked out a simple code where she'd drop her purse if she thought I was in actual danger during the vow renewal. After 4 months of this game, we both knew the line between fake and real vulnerability had gotten dangerously thin. The tech team spent 6 hours doing their final sweep of the Napa estate, installing tiny backup cameras in light fixtures and air vents in case Elena's paranoia made her disable the obvious ones. They put cameras in the bathroom mirrors, behind picture frames, inside fake electrical outlets, everywhere. Every single angle would be covered twice with separate recording systems. That night, while Elena slept beside me, I sat at my desk and wrote her a letter I knew I'd never send. I admitted I'd been a terrible husband who worked too much and tested her love instead of just trusting it. I wrote that my arrogance in thinking she needed to prove herself had helped create this monster we'd both become. The letter went into my safe with all the other evidence. Elena woke up early and set up her phone to film content for her social media about our beautiful vow renewal. She positioned me in the wheelchair by the window, where the light was good, and talked to the camera about her devoted care for her paralyzed husband. She kissed my forehead 20 times to get the perfect shot, each kiss colder than the last. Her performance was so perfect it made my skin crawl. Dean called her phone demanding his payment before tomorrow's plan, and I watched her transfer $50,000 directly from one of my stolen accounts while sitting on my lap. The forensic accountant was monitoring everything in real time and confirmed the transaction created a perfect paper trail linking them together. The timestamp showed I couldn't have authorized it since I was supposedly paralyzed. Our forensic team sent Blake confirmation that they'd documented every search Elena made on my laptop about untraceable poisons and morphine dosing. The timestamps proved I couldn't have made those searches myself since they happened while nurses were documented as repositioning me in bed. Every search term, every website visit, every download was logged as clear evidence of premeditation. The court evaluator emailed his final report with photos he'd taken of Elena's rough handling when she thought nobody was watching. He'd captured her deliberately dropping me during transfers, leaving me in soiled clothes and slapping my face to check if I was really unconscious. He didn't know about our scheme, which made him the perfect unbiased witness to document her cruelty. One of my board members called Elena directly to discuss transition planning, and she took the call in our bedroom while doing her makeup. She told him she was prepared to run the company as a grieving widow and had already been studying the quarterly reports. She mentioned keeping the current management team in place to maintain stability during her mourning period. My security team was recording every word from 3 different devices. Blake spent the morning filing asset freeze injunctions with the court, preparing them to execute the instant arrest warrants were served. He'd identified every account Elena had access to, every property in her name, every investment she'd touched. The paperwork would lock down everything within minutes of her arrest, so she couldn't move a single penny. The judge who'd signed off on the freeze orders would be on standby during tomorrow's ceremony. Elena practiced her vows in front of the mirror, promising to love and cherish me in sickness and health, while checking her phone for messages from Dean. She'd written special vows about caring for me until death finally brought me peace, which she rehearsed with tears that appeared and disappeared on command. Rick arrived that afternoon to go over final details, and Elena pulled him into the garage where she didn't know we had cameras hidden in the toolbox. She showed him the syringe she'd already prepared and explained she'd inject me between my toes after the reception when everyone was cleaning up. She said the morphine dose would stop my heart within minutes, but looked like natural death for someone in my condition. Rick's hands shook as he held the syringe, but he nodded and promised to keep everyone away from our room. Blake listened to the recording and confirmed we finally had everything we needed for attempted murder charges. My mother helped Elena pick out jewelry for tomorrow, pretending to be the supportive mother-in-law, while Elena described how beautiful the ceremony would be. Elena showed her the special wheelchair decorations she'd ordered, white roses and silver ribbons to make me look presentable for photos. My mother's hands trembled as she helped arrange the flowers, but Elena was too focused on her performance to notice. Security confirmed plainclothes officers would be mixed in with the catering staff and photographers. Every exit would be covered, and the arrest teams would be in position before the first guest arrived. The Napa estate would be completely surrounded, but nobody would know until the moment we sprung the trap. As Elena injected my IV with what she thought was a sedative to keep me calm for tomorrow, I watched her face in the reflection of the medical equipment. She was already practicing her widow's grief, preparing for her greatest performance yet. The neurologist called Blake at 3 a.m, his voice shaking as he agreed to testify about the fake diagnosis in exchange for keeping his license. Blake recorded the whole conversation while I listened on speaker, the doctor admitting he'd never seen actual nerve damage in any of my tests. The ADA arrived at dawn with a team of officers dressed as caterers and photographers, spreading them throughout the estate grounds. She confirmed the judge was sitting by his phone, ready to sign arrest warrants the second we had what we needed. My security team did final equipment checks on every hidden camera while Elena slept beside me, her hand resting on the syringe she'd hidden under her pillow. The makeup artist arrived at 7 to prepare Elena for her big day, not knowing she was actually an undercover officer wearing a wire. Elena chatted with her about how devoted she was to her paralyzed husband while the officer recorded every word. My mother helped me into the wheelchair, her hands steady even though I could see the fear in her eyes. Elena dressed me in the same tux I'd worn to our real wedding 3 years ago, adjusting my tie while humming our wedding song. 500 guests started arriving at noon, filling the estate gardens with chatter about the beautiful ceremony. Elena wheeled me down the aisle past rows of people who had no idea they were about to witness evidence of attempted murder. She'd written special vows that made my skin crawl as she read them to the crowd. "I promise to care for you until death brings you the peace you deserve," she said, tears streaming down her face for the cameras. "Your suffering will end soon, my love, and I'll honor your memory forever." The guests shifted in their seats, some exchanging uncomfortable glances at her word choice. The minister pronounced us renewed in our vows, and Elena kissed my forehead, whispering that she'd see me after the reception. She wheeled me away from the crowd toward the private suite we'd prepared, telling guests she needed to give me my medication. Rick and Dean stood guard outside the door, not knowing that plainclothes officers were already moving into position behind them. Elena locked the door and pulled the syringe from her purse, filling it from a vial she'd hidden in her dress. She leaned over me with the needle aimed at the space between my toes, where the injection mark wouldn't show. I watched her face change from fake concern to cold determination as she positioned the needle. "Account number 447-891-2263, I whispered clearly. She froze with the needle an inch from my foot, her eyes going wide as she stared at my face. "How could you possibly know that number?" she said, her voice rising. "You're supposed to be brain dead. You can't even move." The door burst open as my security team rushed in, grabbing the syringe from her hand while she screamed. Officers flooded the room, cuffing Elena while she thrashed and cursed, yelling that I'd set her up. Rick and Dean were on the ground outside, officers reading them their rights while guests gathered at the windows trying to see what was happening. The PR consultant moved through the crowd with practiced calm, announcing there'd been a medical emergency and asking everyone to please gather their things. She handed out pre-written statements about a family matter requiring privacy, while security helped escort confused guests to their cars. Elena kept screaming accusations as they dragged her past the windows, her wedding dress tearing on the rose bushes. The ADA took the syringe as evidence and told me they had everything they needed for attempted murder charges. Within an hour, the estate was empty, except for law enforcement and my legal team. Elena was processed at the county jail, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder and embezzlement of $40 million. Rick broke down in the interrogation room within 20 minutes, agreeing to testify about everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. Dean demanded a lawyer, but the evidence was overwhelming, especially the recordings of him discussing morphine doses with Elena. The forensic team bagged the syringe, the vial, and Elena's purse, while crime scene photographers documented everything. I had to stay in character until the last officer left, maintaining my paralyzed act, even as my muscles screamed from the tension. Blake finally gave me the all-clear to sit up after 6 hours of questioning and evidence collection. The ADA sat across from me in my study, laying out the reality of my situation. "You committed fraud, conspiracy, and false representation," she said, sliding papers across the desk. "We're talking potential prison time unless you cooperate fully with our investigation." She offered me a deal that would keep me out of jail if I testified against Elena and helped untangle the financial crimes. I signed without hesitation, knowing I'd face consequences, but that Elena would face far worse. My phone buzzed with messages from board members who'd already heard about the arrests, demanding explanations. The news would break within hours, and my carefully built reputation would crumble, but at least I'd exposed the truth about Elena. Blake started preparing my defense, while the prosecutor built her case against my wife, ex-best friend, and her accomplice. The hidden camera footage was processed as evidence, hundreds of hours showing Elena's cruelty and planning. My mother finally let herself cry, the months of stress pouring out as she held my hand in the empty estate. The next morning, my phone started buzzing at 5 a.m., with calls from board members demanding answers. I drove to headquarters where 12 executives sat around the conference table looking at me like I was a stranger. They voted unanimously to suspend me as CEO while the investigation played out, and I signed the papers without fighting it. The interim CEO took my office keys while security packed my things into boxes. Blake drafted my public statement that afternoon, and we released it through every major outlet by evening. I admitted the whole fake paralysis scheme, but explained Elena's murder plot and the evidence we'd gathered. Twitter exploded within minutes with people calling me either brilliant or psychotic. News crews camped outside my gates while talk shows debated whether I was victim or villain. The court moved fast on the financial crimes, freezing every offshore account we'd documented within 48 hours. Elena's lawyer tried to argue for access to living expenses, but the judge laughed at the request. Her designer clothes and jewelry got seized for auction while she sat in county jail wearing orange. The forensic accountants found another 10 million we'd missed in cryptocurrency wallets, bringing the total theft to 50 million. Elena's assets vanished overnight into court custody, while she got assigned a public defender fresh out of law school. The prosecutor visited me at home with plea offers for all three conspirators. Elena could get 15 years if she admitted guilt and agreed to psychiatric treatment. Rick would serve 2 years in minimum security for cooperating fully. Dean faced 5 years, but his lawyer was pushing for 3. I signed off on the deals, wanting this finished more than wanting maximum punishment. Family court scheduled hearings about Rick's unborn child, and I met with trust lawyers to set up proper support. The kid didn't choose any of this and deserved security despite everything. We established a $1 million education trust that Elena couldn't touch even after prison. The medical board revoked my neurologist's license after a 3-day hearing where he broke down crying. I testified on his behalf, explaining how I'd pressured him into the scheme. They let me avoid prosecution by funding a $10 million medical ethics program and paying another $5 million in fines. My accountant called it expensive accountability, and I wrote the checks without complaining. 2 months passed with the interim CEO running my company while I watched from the sidelines. The stock price actually went up without me, which hurt more than I expected. Board members visited individually to gauge whether I could ever return. Most thought the scandal made me too toxic for the CEO role, but they recognized I'd built the company from nothing. They offered me a consultant position with half my previous salary and no voting power. I accepted immediately, grateful they'd let me stay involved at all. My first day back in the building, employees stared at me in the hallways like I was a ghost. Some nodded respectfully, while others turned away, and I understood both reactions. The therapist's office overlooked Central Park, and I sat in her leather chair every Tuesday at 3 p.m. She helped me process the trauma of those 4 months lying motionless, while Elena planned my death. We talked about my need to test people, and how it almost destroyed everything I'd built. My mother started joining some sessions, and we slowly worked through years of distance I'd created with my money and paranoia. She moved into my guest house, and we had dinner together most nights, learning to be family again without the walls of wealth between us. Elena took the plea deal after her lawyer explained she'd get 30 years if convicted at trial. Rick testified for 3 days straight, describing every detail of their affair and murder planning. Dean cracked on day 1 and gave prosecutors everything they wanted. The judge sentenced them exactly as promised, while I watched from the gallery's back row. Elena didn't look at me once during sentencing, just stared at her hands while the judge read her 15-year sentence. Rick's baby arrived 2 weeks early while he was in county lockup awaiting transfer. The trust kicked in immediately, covering medical bills and setting up college funds. I hired a family lawyer to ensure the child had proper guardians and would never know the full truth until they were old enough to understand. My company's board met quarterly to review my consultant work, slowly warming to my presence again. The scandal faded from headlines as new billionaire divorces took the spotlight. My Napa estate sold to a tech founder who didn't care about its history. I moved to a smaller place in the city where neighbors didn't know my name or net worth. The fake paralysis scheme cost me $50 million in fines and settlements, plus my reputation and CEO position. But lying in that bed for 4 months taught me that money couldn't buy the one thing I'd always wanted, which was knowing whether someone loved me or for my billions. Elena answered that question definitively, and the price was worth the knowledge. I really appreciate you hanging in there with me today. All the questioning, all the wondering. It's been so meaningful to explore these moments with you. Until we meet again, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.